So, good morning, everyone. My name is Tushar Agarwal, and today I'm going to present my final topic, disinvestment of PSUs. So, we're going to see what is disinvestment, what are its objectives, merits, demerits, and then delve into deeper issues, how it is related to Indian economy, and what are the prospects of disinvestment in the future. So, when we see the word disinvestment, it can be broken down in two words: dis and investment. Dis stands for opposite, and investment means putting in capital or infusion of money. Thus, disinvestment would be the pure opposite. PSUs are public sector undertakings and companies owned and managed by the government, like ONGC, SBI, etc. So, thus, PSUs are any companies in which the government's central or state holding is more than 51%. Thus, disinvestment of PSUs would essentially be the action of the government selling or liquidating an asset or a subsidiary. It can also be referred to as divestment or divestiture. Thus, I request you to not get confused between these two terms because these are interchangeable. And disinvestment is a long term process which is often used by the company to reduce its debt and enhance its long term growth prospects. When we see the objectives of disinvestment, there are many. The first is to reduce the financial burden of the government. As disinvestment is a source of revenue for the government, it decreases the fiscal burden of the nation. Second, to encourage wider share of ownership. Disinvestment encourages private ownership of industries, which brings out new perspectives and processes and thus leaves government to focus on the administrative work. Third, to introduce competition and market discipline. It is important for an economy that there is no monopoly, and disinvestment ensures market discipline. There's free forces in both products and commodities market. Fourth, to help public enterprises upgrade their technology to become competitive. Public enterprises are working towards social welfare and not profits, which often leads to lesser competency in higher expenditures, and they are labeled as sick units. Fourth, problems of labor, personnel, and management. Employees of public enterprises often would be paid less and they would often go to strikes, hence, their movement towards private enterprises was a needed solution. Fifth, lack of autonomy. Now, when you're working in a PSU, you would see bureaucracy, red tapeism, and lack of autonomy, which leads to endless delays. So, these are the various objectives for which a government would go for disinvestment. So now let us focus on what are the merits and demerits of disinvestment. First, focus on the merits. First is quick decision making. Private players value time, and because of less bureaucracy and red tapeism, decisions are made faster, and it does not have to traverse a lot of levels as it has to traverse in public decision making. Revival of PSUs. Various PSUs were sick units who were running in losses. They revived when privatized as there's a change in management and way of doing things. Reduction of public debt. Disinvestment reduces public debt as it acts as capital receipts, thus reduces fiscal deficit. Fourth is greater wealth distribution. As ownership goes from public to private hands, even smaller businessmen and investors can own shares of these privatized companies. So now let us focus on various demerits. First is less focus on social welfare. Private companies' major motive is to ensure profit, and this motive of profit maximization is in contrary to the social welfare focus of various PSUs. Monopoly. Government has to ensure that because of the huge amount of funds needed in these companies, privatization should not result in monopolies as it hinders the growth of market and can exploit consumers. Employee distress. Often employees of an organization do not like change and they resist it. Thus, it can lead to loss of work and efficient hours of work. Fourth, loss of income to government. It can result in loss of regular source of income which comes in the form of dividend as if the government tries to disinvest profitable PSUs. So thus we see that disinvestment has both its pros and cons, but I believe that merits of disinvestment are much more than its demerits, and that is why the government has to ensure that disinvestment is used strategically in order to ensure that it reap benefits for the economy. Now we see that there are various different approaches to disinvestment. The first is minority disinvestment. A minority disinvestment is one where the government retains a majority stake in the company, typically greater than 51%, thus ensuring management control. Historically, minority stakes have either been auctioned off to institutions or offloaded to the public by way of offer for sale. And thus, a lot of the disinvestment decisions that are seen in the present government are also made through public offers. Second, majority disinvestment. A majority disinvestment is one in which the government, post disinvestment, retains a minority stake in the company, that is, it sells off a majority stake. Historically, majority disinvestments have been typically made to strategic partners. They can be public entities like BRPL to IOC, or private entities like the sale of modern foods to Hindustan Liver, Balco to Sterilite, CMC to TCS, etc. The third is a complete privatization. Complete privatization is a form of majority disinvestment wherein 100% control of the company is passed on to the buyer. Examples of this include 18 hotel properties of ITDC and 3 hotel properties of HCR. Now, disinvestment and privatization are often used interchangeably, though they have a slight difference between them. Disinvestment may or may not result in privatization. When the government retains 26% of the shares, carrying voting powers while selling the remaining to a strategic buyer, it would have disinvested but not privatized. Because with 26% voting share, it can still stall vital decisions for which generally a special resolution is required. So, if a company is having more than 26%, if the government is having more than 26% of the shares, then it can still take part in the decision making, and thus that is not privatization. So, now we move on to the various methods of disinvestment. First is public offer, offering shares of public sector enterprises at a fixed price through a prospectus, that is public offer. The offer is made to the general public through the medium of recognized market intermediaries. Initially, equity was offered to retail investors through domestic public issues, but this was followed by issuance of the global depository receipts to tap the overseas market. Second is sale of equity. Sale of equity through auction of share amongst predetermined clientele whose numbers can be large. The reserve price for the PSU's equity can be determined with the assistance of merchant bankers. Third is offer for sale. Offer for sale, like previously described in the last slide, determining the fixed price for sale of a public enterprise, inviting open bidders, and accepting the highest bidder's quotation for sale. Then, fourth is strategic sale. Of late, government is pursuing the strategic sale method. Under this method, the government sells a major portion, which can be 51% and above, of its stake to a strategic buyer and also gives over the management control. Disinvestment price will be market based and not prefixed, and PSU's shares will be under the Department of Disinvestment. So these are the things that we have focused on disinvestment. So now we see that how it has been relevant with economy of India and India's history. So first focus how it happened in India and when it began. So when India's economy was in shambles in 1991, that is when the change happened. It began in the year 1991 and 2 with 31 selected PSUs disinvested for more than 3000 crores. In August 1996, the Disinvestment Commission, chaired by G.V. Ramakrishna, was set up to advise, supervise, monitor, and publicize gradual disinvestment of Indian PSUs. It submitted reports where privatization of more than 50 PSUs was recommended. However, the Disinvestment Commission ceased to exist in May 2004. But then, the Department of Disinvestment, which was set up in December 1999 and renamed Ministry of Disinvestment in 2001, became the part of Ministry of Finance in 2004 when the Disinvestment Commission was seized. And since then, this process has been propelled by government in order to reduce the fiscal deficit and improve the situation of Indian economy. Now let us see why was it needed in India. When amidst the falling economy, PSUs were analyzed, and in 1991 there were 236 PSUs in operation and only 123 were profit making, which is just above 50%. And to make this worse, there's this fact which says that the top 20 PSUs were responsible for 80% of the profit, which shows that even if the PSUs which are profitable, they were just above the break even. The public sector was ridden with problems such as low rate of return on capital employed, whereas it was either a negative or just above the positive, barely maximum 1 or 2%. Then there was poor capacity utilization, overstaffing, bureaucratization leading to excessive delays and wastage of scarce resources. Thus, these are testament to the fact that PSUs were becoming more of a liability on the government rather than assets, and something had to be done, and that was disinvestment. So now we see what are the progress since then. Disinvestment in India is aimed at reducing the financial burden on the government due to the inefficient and poorly functioned PSUs, which are often labeled as sick units, and to improve public finance. Against an aggregate target of 54 crores to be raised from PSU disinvestment from 1991 to 2001, the government managed to raise just 20,000 crores, which is even less than its half. Then, as we know that as of 31st March 2018, there were as many as 339 central PSEs, and the number of profit making PSEs were only 184. Now, there's often this question, should the profit making PSUs be disinvested? And there's often an argument that they should not be disinvestment and government loses a dividend, and that's a very major source of revenue for the government. But a very good example against this argument would be Balco, which was a profit making company that earned the government an average dividend of around 5.7 crore every year. But when the government disinvested it, it started getting 82 crore every year, a difference of 77 crores. That's just not one example. The same thing happened with CMC, which used to give average dividend of around 80 lakhs, but post this investment, it would give the revenue of or profit of 15.2 crores annually. Thus, as we see that various companies which were actually disinvested would make higher profits, and thus the present government has also stated with Niti Aayog guidelines are not solely based on whether the PSU is making profits or losses. It's a more collaborative and more comprehensive guidelines and does not focuses on the profitability of the PSU. And then we also see the progress, and this is a very important table that I'd like you to look at. There's in the first column there's the budget estimate, the second is the revised estimate, and the proceeds that are there from the disinvestment are actually uh, the achievement percentages is corresponding to the revised estimate. So one thing that I would like to suggest to the government is focus on the budget estimate that it has given in the initial year, because that should be the parameter on which our success or our progress should be recorded, and not the revised estimate. But one trend that you can see from this table is that the it has always been increasing, and we've been able to increase our proceeds from disinvestment over the years. One quick little stat that I'd like to give you is that in the year 2009 2014, disinvestment proceeds were around 1 lakh 5,000 crore, whereas in the next 5 years, the figure jumped to 2 lakh 80,000 crores. So that is even more than the double. And that shows that the government has been moving towards this investment in order to improve the health of the economy, and that is a right step. Uh, Figure is really important as it tells us that how much the government has worked in the recent years, and also gives us a bit of outlook towards the economy. That when the government had actually put in objective of disinvesting of around 1 lakh 5,000 crores, but actually it was only able to do 48,000 crores and a plus of 1,000 crores. I think the end figure was around 50, and its revised estimate was 65,000 crores, which kind of shows that the government is actually putting up a high, ambitious target, but has not been able to achieve because of the recessionary effects and the recessionary observation that we've seen in different sectors of the economy. So this is also a very good way to segue into our next topic. This is one company that often talked about when it comes to disinvestment, and that is Air India. So now let us discuss the Air India conundrum. That Air India is under a huge debt, and thus government of India has given the nod to its disinvestment, which means the government is willing to shed a substantial portion of its stake and hand over the management of the ailing. Now, when we say that hand over the management is involved, then we know that when we discuss three different approaches to disinvestment, now this will be a case of majority in disinvestment. And Air India has a debt of 52,000 crores, including both aircraft and working operations capital debt. And its merger with Indian Airlines back in 2007 did not prove to be a good decision. And Air India has not had a profitable year since a decade. And that is why it is only a logical decision for the government to disinvest and move. And India and the government of India is focusing towards a strategic disinvestment of Air India and its five subsidiaries. And when it's proposed a disinvestment, Indigo showed formal interest in taking over the international operations, but I believe more clarity on various issues is yet to come, because the authorities tried this process 2 years ago and it did not work out. But this time they got a much better response, but because of the current pandemic situation, it has again stalled, and it will be very interesting to see now where what approach the government of India takes, especially considering the economy, and the IMF has given us a 2% growth rate. So that is not a very favorable aspect. So it will be very interesting to see how the government approaches this in the next few months. Then now let us discuss how budget of 2020 and disinvestment are related. Now the government last year had a target of 1,05,000 crores, but as we knew that the government's long-term objective is to keep fiscal deficit under 3%. Now, for this, the government needed higher capital receipts, and government did not want to borrow as it would put more pressure on economy through interest payments. So the government took the route of disinvestment and put a very ambitious target of 2,10,000 crores as the disinvestment for the financial year 2020-21. Now, it is an ambitious target in order to keep the fiscal deficit under the bracket of 3.5% of the GDP, as said by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Now, how will the government actually achieve this target? Now, the government's major plan revolves around disinvesting a small portion of LIC, that is life insurance company, by way of initial public offering other than through public sector banks and financial institutions. Now, as we know that LIC holds the most valuable assets of the company. If it's listed, it's going to become the most valuable company of India, with even more than Reliance and TCS combined. And that is why even a 5% of this investment of LIC is enough to achieve the target of 2,10,000 crores. So that is why it also very bullish move as far as Indian economy is concerned. So this would also require a lot of time as they have to amend acts and a lot of formal procedures have to be done. So I think next few months are very interesting to see from disinvestment perspective on how government is able to take care of these things. But I believe if there's a plan at hand, then only these things can be taken, because these are not immediate solutions. These are long term plans which are drawn out, and especially the changes that have happened in the business environment due to the coronavirus pandemic. They would have need some time, and I think that is why it will only be in years that these plans will be in place and at work. So it from my side. I hope you've understood all the different aspects of this investment and how it is relatable to Indian economy. If there are any questions, please feel free to message me. I would love to solve them, and hope that let us have a discussion on this investment in and after a few months and situation changes in Indian economy is in a much better situation. So thank you guys. That was Tushar Agarwal from BMS. Thank you.